Burning is finally getting its chance in the spotlight. First, we had an artifact set in 4.6 that relied on the reaction being present, and now we have Emilie, the newest unit who will do the exact same thing. In this video, I'm going to discuss Emilie's kit, my thoughts on it, her possible best teams and scenarios, and finally, what potential she may have in the future. Here's a quick list of disclaimers to read through if you need. It'll be down below, along with music credits and social media links. Without further ado, let's talk about Emilie. Her kit is extremely straightforward, as nearly everything is dependent on her dealing damage. Her skill deploys a lamp that deals off-field dendro damage, official style. If there are burning enemies nearby, she will generate sense. After reaching a certain amount, her lamp gets upgraded to level 2, dealing higher damage and firing more shots. Her burst puts her lamp in a hyper state, causing it to deal a lot of damage over a very short period. It didn't specify the damage type, so we can assume it's burst damage. Side note, I love the animation. The lighting here is really detailed and it makes the effect of her burst stand out so much. But back to gameplay though. She also has a passive that deals a hit of damage whenever she collects a certain number of cents. And this is supposed to incentivize having a continuous burning aura, instead of just leveling up the stuff and then dropping the reaction. To incentivize keeping the aura activated, there's another passive that will grant her a damage bonus against burning enemies. And finally, she has an ability to grant burning resistance whenever the skill is activated, which is good to reduce the risk of dying. Based on what we've been told, Emilie's damage is seemingly varied. She's mainly skill damage focused, but she also has value in her burst. Additionally, we have no clue what kind of damage her passive does, but if it's not skill damage, it puts even less value on Golden Troop. This may be intended to nudge her towards the Unfinished Reverie set as her best in slot, since it buffs all of her damage instead of just one type. However, it is debatable on whether or not it is worth it to farm that over Golden Troop. Now that I've covered her abilities, I'll share my opinions on her game design. From a concept standpoint, purely a concept standpoint, I don't really see anything wrong with her kit. I would argue that it's really hard to make a DPS bad purely based on descriptive aspects, because everything just needs to be focused on increasing their output and providing comfortable gameplay. Everything in her kit is cohesive. Since they didn't mention any alternative scalings, we can assume it just all scales on attack. Her extra damage hit is just an additional bonus to her already existing scent collection mechanic, and her damage bonus is going to increase every aspect of her damage. Then we have the resistance debuff, which is just there to prevent your allies from keeling over. Directly speaking, there's not a lot for me to say, but there are a lot of implications in her kit that I do want to briefly talk about. The first is that her kit is able to indirectly address the Quicken issue. Dendro DPS units are usually reliant on Quicken to buff their damage. To make Emilie feel fresh, the challenge is how to make her viable in Burning without making her just as viable, if not better, in a pure Quicken team. Her two passives are both reliant on maintaining a burning aura and damaging burning enemies. And while it's technically possible to have both burning and quicken on an enemy, it's a pretty difficult thing to pull off. It's also important to know what kind of reaction unit she is. We generally have two main roles for reaction-based units. The first is usually known as a reaction buffer. The second doesn't really have an official term, so I'm just going to call them reaction capitalizers. Buffers are as you expect. Their kit directly buffs the reaction that they focus on. Examples include Nilou and Kaveh in Bloom, or Baiju for any dendro reaction. Capitalizers are the complete opposite. Instead of using their kit to buff a reaction, reactions buff their kit. To name a few, Fremine uses Shatter to buff his skill, Chevrez relies on Overload to apply a res debuff, Kazuha uses Swirl to grant a damage bonus. Emilie falls under the capitalizer category. She does nothing to buff burning damage, but having burning present improves her own damage. Admittedly, I was a little disappointed that her kit wasn't a burning buffer, because I really wanted to see that in Genshin. However, that's not a game design flaw, it's just a personal preference. Because she doesn't buff burning, it means that the damage ceiling in a pure burning team isn't going to be as high as its variants. Pure burning is effectively just monopyro, which isn't inherently bad, but since the damage of the reaction itself isn't that good, it's naturally going to be capped compared to other teams. The next list of things I want to discuss are aspects we should watch out for and test when she officially releases. These are all the number-based aspects that can make or break her gameplay. First off, the basic stuff. Damage multipliers. Is the damage output going to be good or bad? There's also burst reliance. Do you need to use her burst consistently? If so, how many particles does she generate and how much ER would she need? The next thing is her range. It's pretty clear that her lamp is a circle impact ability, so part of her viability will be how far it can reach. The smaller it is, the more likely an enemy can walk out and avoid taking damage. And while it's indirect, her skill cooldown will also be affected by the range of her ability. If an enemy were to leave the field, could you easily reposition it or would you just suffer? Uptime also plays a role. Can she maintain the lamp the entire time? Or are you gonna have a few seconds where you just can't deal damage? We should also test whether she can snapshot her abilities. If you run her with Bennett, for example, it'll be good to note whether you should use his burst before or after Emilie's abilities. And finally, elemental application. Can Emilie apply enough Dendro to sustain burning? Can she apply enough to drive other Dendro reactions? Of course, her application rate will affect how well she can perform in the various burning teams. Speaking of, let's talk about these variant teams. Something important about burning is that it's generally used as a supplementary reaction to enable other reactions. The best burning teams aren't pure burning, it's stuff like burn meld, burn vape, overburn. If Emilie were to be limited to just Dendro and Pyro teams, she would have to be able to output an insane amount of personal damage or provide some kind of utility to warrant that limitation. But luckily, she isn't like that. You can use her in different team comps, and if you usually run someone like Nahida in these burning teams, Emilie can replace that slot and allow you to run Nahida somewhere else. There is a major note of comparison between the two that will affect who's objectively better. For example, Nahida applies 1.5 units of Dendro as opposed to the standard 1 unit. For burning teams, this means she's able to maintain the reaction slightly longer, which allows for a slightly more comfortable or flexible uptime. In order for Emilie to be a viable replacement, she needs to apply enough Dendro to maintain the aura for your other units to use. In a burn melt or burn vape comp, if she applies too little, you may have to rely on a second Dendro unit to keep burning up and running. And if you want to add a little bit of Burgeon in your burning teams, her application will also affect how well that can play out. We can also explore Emilie's potential in Dendro, Pyro, and Electro comps. There's a special combination called a Quick Burn team, which allows you to have both a Quicken and a Burning aura on an enemy. With the right amount of application for all three elements, you can have Burning, Aggravate, Overload, and Spread. The community has coined this team comp Balls. Overload capitalizes the L instead of the O, and this is probably because Balls is more memorable than Bows. I've tried a few teams with this core, and overall it's been pretty fun and pretty strong. Burning is very present in this team, so Emilie shouldn't have any trouble keeping uptime on that. I did, however, have some trouble with getting Quicken uptime, so that part is slightly finicky. If you can make the application work in your favor, then it would theoretically be Emilie's best team for personal damage. She has a pretty good core to start with already, but let's discuss what kind of future content can make her even stronger. New units and gear are always being released, and they can have pretty huge impacts on current characters. I mentioned before that I wish she was someone who buffed the burning reaction itself, but the fact that she isn't a burning buffer simply means we haven't gotten one yet. That door is still waiting to be opened, so all we have to do is be patient. Introducing a burning buffer would be a great pairing with Emilie. She works as a great DPS, while the buffer works to make burning's damage better. Ideally, they're a Pyro unit to work as a usable core for the team. Another teammate option could be an on-field burning DPS. Right now, our on-field Dendro DPSs benefit more from Quicken, and Pyro DPSs use Vaporize or Melt. Interestingly, the best on-field burning DPS is a Cryo unit to use Melt, or an Electro unit to trigger overloads with burning. So a Dendro or Pyro on-fielder who could capitalize on burning would not only be synergistic, but it would also be a breath of fresh air from the usual Quicken or Vape units we get. The last archetype I think we can utilize is a dedicated Dendro damage buffer, kind of like Farazan or Goro. Since most of Emilie's teams wouldn't take advantage of Quicken, a unit who could buff raw Dendro damage somehow would be a great option for her. And this unit would of course be useful on the other Dendro DPS units we have, so everyone wins. Dendro damage buffer. I should make a note of that for a future video. In conclusion, I think Emilie has a very well-designed kit, at least from a conceptual and qualitative standpoint. Any potential flaws she has are going to be based around the quantitative aspects. And yes, if you're wondering, I will be pulling for her. Having a dedicated burning unit will open up so many doors for my team roster. Anyway, that's going to do it for the video. Based on the info we already have, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on Emilie's kit are.
And are you planning to pull for her? Why or why not? If you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribing to support the channel. Thanks again for watching everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye!